The room gasped. In the middle of the glittering charity gala, with chandeliers blazing above and music fading into stunned silence, Victoria Hayes had just lifted her heel and kicked a maid to the ground. Glass shattered across the marble floor. The sound echoed like thunder, silencing laughter, freezing every smile. For a moment, no one breathed. Victoria stood tall, her silk gown flowing like liquid gold, her chin tilted with arrogance. She relished the eyes fixed on her. Attention was her favorite currency, and tonight, she had plenty of it. To her, the woman on the floor was nothing but a shadow in a plain uniform, poor, replaceable, invisible. Before we dive deeper into this story, hit the like button and subscribe now. Here you'll find emotional, life-changing stories that will keep you hooked and inspired every single time. Pathetic, Victoria muttered, brushing imaginary dust off her gown. Know your place. The maid's name was Marianne. Her hands trembled as she picked up the broken glass, the shards cutting into her palms. But she made no sound. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. Instead, she lifted her head, her dark eyes meeting Victoria's with a calmness that cut deeper than any insult. It was the look of someone who had endured far worse than humiliation. A look that carried strength money couldn't buy. The room whispered. Women clutched pearls. Men glanced at each other, unsure whether to intervene or pretend nothing had happened. In their world of fortune and rich appearances, silence was safer than confrontation. And so Victoria smiled wider, convinced she had won. To her, power meant stepping on whoever was beneath her heel. But the silence in Marianne's stare told another story. A story no one in that room was ready to hear. Victoria flipped her hair back, her laugh sharp as crystal. Honestly, these events should screen the help. Don't you agree? She said to no one in particular, expecting agreement. No one responded. Eyes darted away. Glass crunched under Marianne's careful hands as she gathered the fragments into her tray. She stood slowly, her dignity intact, her uniform dusted but her pride untouched. And without a word, she walked out of the Golden Hall, leaving behind more questions than answers. Victoria rolled her eyes. Good riddance. She thought it was over. But if she had looked closer, if she had studied that calm, unbroken gaze, she would have seen the detail that would undo everything she believed about money, power, and herself. Because Marianne was not who Victoria thought she was. She was not just a maid. And someone in the shadows of the hall had seen the entire scene. Someone with the power to turn Victoria's cruelty into her downfall. The music resumed faintly, but the mood had changed. Conversations hushed. People avoided Victoria's eyes, though she mistook their silence for admiration. She believed she had reminded everyone who truly belonged at the top. She had no idea she had just declared war without even realizing it. And when the consequences came, they would come faster, sharper, and more devastating than she could ever imagine. The Golden Hall buzzed with uneasy whispers long after Marianne slipped out. Glass had been swept away, music restored, but the wound in the atmosphere refused to close. Guests murmured behind jeweled hands, stealing glances at Victoria Hayes as she strutted across the room with a glass of champagne. She believed she had conquered the moment. To her, silence equaled submission. What she failed to notice was that silence also meant judgment. A woman in pearls leaned toward her husband. Did you see how she kicked her? In public. The man cleared his throat nervously. Keep your voice down. That's Victoria Hayes. Her father still controls half the city's contracts. Do you want to risk that fortune? Others were less cautious. A young journalist scribbled notes in the corner, her eyes gleaming. To her, this wasn't just gossip. It was a story worth money. Victoria reveled in the stares, mistaking disgust for envy. She laughed loudly, her golden earrings swaying. Honestly, people need to learn. If you're poor, at least be useful. She clinked her glass against a man's who looked too terrified to disagree. But outside, Marianne walked slowly through the night air, each step heavy yet steady. The sting in her body didn't compare to the weight in her heart. She could have shouted, she could have cursed, but her silence carried power. Every breath reminded her that dignity couldn't be stolen by cruelty. And while Victoria thought she had erased her, Marianne was already unforgettable. Across the city, in a penthouse that overlooked the skyline like a throne over its kingdom, Alexander Carter leaned back in his leather chair. He was a man who owned every inch of space he entered, his presence commanding, his success unquestionable. Dark skin, sharp suits, and eyes that saw through pretense. He was the billionaire CEO people feared to cross. His phone rang. A private line, reserved only for calls that mattered. "Sir," came the voice, careful, hesitant. "There was an incident tonight at the Hayes charity event." Alexander's brow furrowed. Incident? Yes. It involved a woman, a maid. Her name was Marianne Carter. The room went still. The air itself seemed to pause. Alexander's hand tightened around the phone, his jaw set like iron. His eyes, usually calm and unreadable, darkened. "Tell me everything," he said. The report was short, but every word cut deep. The laughter. The shove. The arrogance. And Victoria Hayes, the name that would soon dominate his every thought. When the call ended, Alexander remained silent, staring at the city lights. His mind was a storm, but his face revealed nothing. Power wasn't in shouting. Power was in planning. Back at the gala, Victoria danced as though the night were hers alone. She whispered to a friend about a shopping trip to Paris, about a new necklace worth more than some people's homes. Every careless word dripped with the same poison she had poured on Marianne. She didn't notice the way people pulled away. She didn't see the journalist slipping out with notes that would ignite headlines by morning. She didn't care that her reputation, so carefully polished, had begun to crack. What she cared about was being seen, admired, envied. And tonight, she thought she had secured exactly that. But somewhere above the city, in a tower of glass and steel, a man with the power to bury fortunes and build empires was already moving pieces she didn't even know existed. And he would not forgive. Not this time. The morning after the gala, the city whispered. Newspapers, online feeds, and social media feeds carried the echoes of Victoria Hayes' public humiliation of Marianne Carter. Her name trended among the elite, not for her beauty, not for her fortune, but for cruelty. Yet Victoria scrolled through her phone, dismissing every headline with a smirk. She believed the rich could survive anything. She believed she was untouchable. She believed wrongfully. Even at breakfast in her penthouse, sunlight streaming over her perfectly curated view of the skyline, she brushed off the murmurs of gossip. "People are just jealous," she said, swirling her coffee in a gold-rimmed cup. "They wish they had what I have. Money, beauty, influence. That's all that matters. But influence has a price, and arrogance makes it easier to forget." Across town, Marianne awoke in her small apartment, simple but immaculate. Her hands still tingled from the tray incident, but she held no anger that would poison her. Instead, she felt clarity, a quiet fire. She had survived cruelty before, and survival had taught her patience. What Victoria didn't know, what no one in that glittering hall knew, was that Marianne had a history intertwined with power, with decisions that could change the course of empires. She carried herself with the dignity of someone who had never forgotten her worth. Meanwhile, Alexander Carter sat in his office, overlooking the city like a general scanning a battlefield. He had spent decades building his fortune, cultivating a reputation that demanded respect. And now, hearing about the incident involving Marianne, he felt the pulse of protective fury awaken. His mother, the woman whose kindness had shaped him, had been disrespected in public, and the perpetrator wasn't just anyone. She was Victoria Hayes, a woman who would soon discover that money and arrogance could not shield her from consequences. Alexander made a few discreet calls. His voice was calm, deliberate, but each word carried weight. The people who answered understood immediately. He was serious, and his plan was already in motion. Victoria, oblivious, attended a brunch the following day, pretending the world's judgment was merely background noise. Friends complimented her dress. Her laughter flowed freely, but under the surface, cracks were forming. Invitations were fewer, whispers more frequent. Some old acquaintances avoided her glance. Some socialites smiled politely but kept distance. Money could buy comfort, beauty could buy attention, but dignity, true respect, could not be purchased. Victoria ignored these signals. Ignored them like she ignored the lives she trampled. Yet every step she took, every laugh she offered, was shadowed by a growing unease she refused to name. Marianne, on the other hand, moved carefully through her day. She didn't need recognition. She didn't need applause. But she knew that the world sometimes needed to see truth, quiet, unyielding, undeniable. She began preparing herself for the day when her silence would speak louder than Victoria's arrogance ever could. And while Victoria thought she had dismissed Marianne, she had already captured the attention of someone whose fortune and power dwarfed her own. Alexander watched quietly, knowing exactly when to act, understanding that timing would make all the difference. A single misstep by Victoria could unravel everything she held dear. Victoria went to bed that night convinced the world still belonged to her. She did not hear the whispers of judgment that floated in the air like a storm yet to come. She did not sense the eyes tracing her every move from towers and offices, analyzing, calculating. And in the shadows, Alexander's presence loomed larger than any wealth, any party, any social victory could ever rival. The world was changing. She just didn't know it yet. The city skyline glowed under the evening lights, reflecting wealth, ambition, and the invisible cracks beneath the golden surface. Victoria Hayes arrived at the gala that night, dressed in a gown of deep emerald that hugged every curve, her hair cascading in perfect waves. She entered with the confidence of someone who believed the world bent at her feet. Tonight she had a plan: to charm, to dazzle, to assert her place among the richest, most powerful people in the room. She did not notice Marianne standing quietly at the edge, delivering drinks with meticulous care, her eyes scanning the crowd without fear or complaint. Though dressed as a maid, Marianne's posture radiated dignity. Her presence was subtle yet magnetic, and those who paid attention could sense it, the quiet strength that spoke louder than wealth or status ever could. Victoria made her way to the center of the room, laughing at jokes, offering compliments, and smiling at those who could help advance her social empire. She thrived on attention. Every eye on her was validation, every whispered compliment a confirmation of her power. Then, across the hall, Alexander Carter appeared. His entrance was understated, yet every step he took commanded the room. Dressed in a sharp navy suit, his dark eyes scanned the gathering with precision. He had heard about Victoria's incident with Marianne, and tonight, he intended to observe before intervening. Wealth and power gave him access, but patience gave him control. Victoria, unaware of who he was, approached him with a practiced smile, attempting to charm the man whose presence seemed to absorb every ounce of energy in the room. She leaned slightly, her voice melodic and measured, sharing a story of a recent purchase, a rare necklace worth more than many could earn in a lifetime. Alexander listened politely, his expression carefully neutral. But his mind was elsewhere. Every word, every gesture Victoria made reminded him of the woman she had humiliated, the woman whose strength had already captured his attention. He watched the subtle flickers in Marianne's gaze as she served the drinks. A single glance between Marianne and Alexander was enough to send a ripple of tension through the air, unnoticed by the oblivious Victoria. Victoria laughed at her own jokes, leaning closer, unaware of the silent conversation happening between Alexander and Marianne. Their eyes met briefly, a flash of understanding, a recognition of something larger than money or social status. Marianne's gaze carried unspoken messages, and Alexander's response was measured, almost imperceptible, but the impact was profound. The crowd around them continued in oblivious chatter, clinking glasses and exchanging superficial compliments. Yet the tension between Marianne, Victoria, and Alexander had shifted the atmosphere. Power, wealth, and privilege could manipulate most of the room, but the undercurrent of something deeper was now undeniable. Victoria, still smiling, remained blissfully unaware that she was no longer in control of the room. The subtle power dynamics had shifted, and though she couldn't see it yet, the balance of influence had begun to tip. Marianne carried herself with quiet authority, moving gracefully between tables, her eyes never leaving Victoria for long. Alexander's gaze followed, analyzing, calculating, waiting for the precise moment when intervention would be most effective. As the night progressed, Victoria felt an inexplicable tension. Something in the room seemed different, charged with an energy she couldn't name. She brushed it off, attributing it to nerves or imagination, but deep down, a faint unease began to creep in. And then, in a fleeting moment, Marianne's eyes met Alexander's again. That look, the one brief, intense connection, made the air feel charged with anticipation, as if the world had held its breath for a single heartbeat. Victoria laughed again, unaware of the silent storm gathering around her, the forces she had unknowingly provoked. She believed she remained the center of attention, the ruler of her carefully constructed world. But the game had changed. The gala had reached its peak. Crystal glasses glimmered, chandeliers reflected wealth, and the room was alive with the low hum of money, ambition, and whispered admiration. Victoria Hayes felt untouchable, the center of attention as always, her laughter ringing like polished silver. She believed her night was perfect, that her charm and fortune had sealed her position in every corner of the social world. Marian moved quietly among the guests, her uniform simple, her expression calm, but her eyes held a secret that would soon turn the world upside down. She served drinks with elegance, each movement controlled, measured, precise. She carried herself with dignity, unaware that the moment of truth was approaching faster than anyone expected. Alexander Carter stood near the edge of the hall, watching. Dark eyes scanning, calculating. He had observed Victoria for hours, noting every gesture, every laugh, every careless word. But his attention wasn't on the guests, the fortune, or the parties. It was on Marianne. On her strength, her composure, the quiet force she radiated. And he had known, all along, that the time had come to reveal the truth. Victoria approached him, confident, radiant, certain that charm and money could influence any man. She leaned close, speaking in a soft, practiced voice, sharing a story about a recent luxury purchase, a necklace worth more than some could earn in a lifetime. Alexander listened, nodding politely, every detail filed away in his mind. Then, with calm authority, he finally spoke. "She's my mother," he said. The words hung in the air, cutting through the room like a knife. The laughter faded, the chatter stilled, and Victoria froze mid-smile, her words trapped in her throat. Marian paused, lifting her head slowly, and the world seemed to stop. Victoria's eyes widened. She blinked once, twice, unable to process what she had just heard. The maid she had humiliated, the woman she had shoved and laughed at in public, was not just someone serving drinks. She was the mother of a billionaire. The mother of Alexander Carter, the man standing before her, calm, composed, but with a presence that dwarfed her arrogance. For a moment, Victoria couldn't breathe. The floor felt unsteady beneath her. Her heart raced, and the gala, the music, the lights, the glitter, faded into background noise. All she could feel was the weight of her mistake, the enormity of her arrogance. Marianne's expression was unreadable. She didn't need to speak. The power of the revelation was already evident in the shift of the room's energy. Guests stared in disbelief, murmurs spreading like wildfire. The woman they had dismissed moments ago commanded attention now without saying a word. Victoria's mind raced, replaying the moment again and again, the kick, the laughter, the look of silent strength she had ignored. Every action she had taken now carried a new meaning, a heavy, undeniable consequence. Money, beauty, status. None of it could shield her from the gravity of what she had done. Alexander's voice cut through the stunned silence. "You underestimated her," he said quietly, deliberately, and Victoria felt the sting of truth pierce her like a sudden cold wind. "And now, you will understand why respect is earned, not bought." The revelation spread through the gala like an electric current. People shifted in their seats, whispers growing into a hum of astonishment. Victoria's world, built on privilege and entitlement, began to crumble piece by piece. Yet Marianne remained composed. Her dignity, her silence, her strength, they were unshaken. She had endured humiliation, and now, the balance of power had shifted entirely. Victoria finally spoke, her voice a whisper, trembling. I didn't know." Alexander's gaze softened slightly, but the weight of the moment remained. The night had changed forever. And Victoria realized, too late, that a single action, the kick, the laughter, the arrogance, could alter a life, a family, a fortune. The room waited, breathless, for what would come next. The morning after the revelation, Victoria Hayes woke to a silence that felt heavier than any noise she had ever known. The sun poured through her penthouse windows, casting light on luxury she had always taken for granted. Now the gilded walls, the rare art, and the velvet furnishings felt meaningless. Her fortune was intact, but it could not shield her from what had begun to unravel: her reputation, her pride, and the fragile illusion that she controlled the world. Notifications pinged on her phone, emails, messages, news alerts. Every headline, every whispered comment across social media, told the same story. The woman she had humiliated was Alexander Carter's mother. The kick, the laughter, the arrogance she thought inconsequential had been witnessed, recorded, and shared. The city, which had once admired her wealth and charm, now watched with fascination and judgment. Victoria stared at the screen, her perfectly manicured fingers trembling. For the first time, her fortune felt like a cage. No amount of money could erase the public humiliation she had caused or the social consequences already in motion. Invitations she had always taken for granted disappeared. Friends who had praised her for years avoided her calls. Even business partners, who had once sought to profit from her connections, began to hesitate. The world she had built on charm and money was quietly, inexorably collapsing. Meanwhile, Marianne Carter moved through her day with calm precision. Every gesture was deliberate, measured, and dignified. Though she had endured the humiliation, she did not respond with anger. She understood power differently. Strength, patience, and composure, qualities Victoria had scorned, were far more formidable than wealth alone. Marianne's quiet dignity now commanded attention without words, and those who had witnessed the gala began to see her not as a maid, but as a woman who could not be diminished. Alexander Carter, observing from a distance, orchestrated a delicate balance. His intent was not vengeance, but correction. His mother had been disrespected, yet he understood the importance of teaching a lesson that would endure. His wealth and influence gave him the reach to impact Victoria's world, but his careful strategy ensured that the lesson was inevitable rather than forced. He knew when to intervene and when to allow natural consequences to take hold. Victoria, oblivious at first, began to notice subtle changes. Invitations vanished without explanation. Conversations that had once flowed with admiration now contained polite distance, gentle rebukes hidden behind smiles. She attempted to call friends, offering her charm and excuses, but responses were curt, hesitant, or non-existent. Wealth could buy luxury, but it could not purchase forgiveness or respect. Her social armor was cracking. At work, Victoria sensed the shift in a more concrete way. Meetings that had always concluded in her favor now ended with quiet resistance. Colleagues exchanged glances she could not fully interpret. Deals she had expected to finalize stalled. Negotiations grew tense. The realization that influence alone could not dominate others unsettled her. Each setback, subtle as it was, reminded her that actions have consequences far beyond what money can correct. The turning point came when Alexander sent an invitation for a private meeting under the pretense of business. Victoria arrived, confident at first, only to be confronted with a presence she could not charm or intimidate. Alexander's dark eyes, steady and unwavering, carried the weight of authority tempered with moral purpose. Beside him, Marianne stood quietly, her posture calm, her gaze unwavering. The two of them together radiated a force Victoria had never encountered. "You underestimated her," Alexander said, his voice calm but piercing. "And you failed to recognize the strength that cannot be bought or broken." Victoria's words faltered. Excuses, charm, and wealth were useless now. She realized she had misjudged not only Marianne but the power of integrity and patience. Every arrogant action, every careless insult, had been recorded in the minds of those who mattered most. Marianne remained silent, her presence alone delivering a lesson Victoria could not ignore. Her quiet composure magnified the impact of Alexander's words. Wealth and status paled in comparison to the power of human dignity, and Victoria was forced to confront a reality she had long refused to see. Money could buy comfort, influence could open doors, but neither could erase the consequences of cruelty. By the time the meeting ended, Victoria felt the full weight of accountability. The world she had thought untouchable was shifting beneath her feet. Every privilege she had relied upon now seemed fragile, every gesture of arrogance now an open wound she had to reconcile. She left with a mixture of fear, shame, and the faintest spark of understanding. Real change required more than words, more than money, more than appearances. Victoria thought she had lost everything, until she realized there was still more to fall. Victoria Hayes stared at her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror, the city lights flickering across her face. For the first time, she saw herself without illusion. The woman staring back was no longer confident, no longer untouchable. She had wealth, yes, but it felt hollow. She had status, yes, but it carried no respect. And most painfully of all, she had allowed arrogance to define her, harming someone whose strength she had underestimated. The weeks following the gala had changed everything. Invitations she once took for granted vanished. Old friends, careful and polite, now spoke only in distance. Business opportunities stalled. Money could not repair the fractures in her reputation. Every whispered conversation, every cautious glance reminded her that respect cannot be bought. And in the center of it all was Marianne Carter, quiet, composed, powerful in ways Victoria had never understood. Victoria knew she had to act differently. The first step was humility. She reached out to Marianne, not with excuses or charm, but with sincerity. The first meeting was awkward. Words faltered. Apologies felt insufficient. But Marianne's calm, measured presence created a space for real acknowledgement. "It took time," Marianne said, "but seeing that you understand is more important than hearing apologies. What you do next will define you." Those words became Victoria's guide. She began volunteering, quietly and without fanfare, helping communities she had never considered before. She worked to understand people, to listen, to offer assistance without expectation of recognition. Her actions were small at first, mentoring young women, donating anonymously to causes that mattered, attending local charity events not as a socialite but as someone willing to contribute meaningfully. Each effort chipped away at her arrogance, slowly reshaping her understanding of value and power. Alexander Carter observed quietly, satisfied. His purpose was never to humiliate, only to illuminate the lessons she needed to learn. Watching Victoria confront her shortcomings, watching her grow in empathy, patience, and respect, was a different kind of reward than any fortune he had built. Marianne's dignity remained intact throughout, and her patience allowed Victoria to discover the transformative power of accountability. One afternoon, Victoria invited Marianne to a quiet cafe, far from the glittering world of galas and wealth. They sat across from each other, the hum of the city around them fading into insignificance. Victoria spoke honestly, recounting moments when she had taken kindness for granted, when she had acted cruelly, when she had let money define her value. Marianne listened without interruption, her eyes steady, her presence a reminder of the quiet strength Victoria now aspired to embody. "You've begun to see," Marianne said, her voice calm but firm. "Understanding comes first. Acting with integrity follows. The world will judge, but it will also notice when someone truly changes." Victoria nodded, tears pricking the corners of her eyes. She realized that fortune alone could never teach this lesson. Only experience, reflection, and human connection could. She felt gratitude for the challenge Marianne had presented, not for the pain it caused, but for the clarity it had revealed. She understood that the journey toward redemption required humility, courage, and empathy. Months passed. Victoria's actions, guided by genuine intention, began to repair her relationships. Invitations returned, not as symbols of status, but as recognition of her transformed approach to life. Business partners responded positively, impressed not by her wealth but by her authenticity. And slowly, the social world that had once celebrated her superficial charm now respected the woman who had learned the value of integrity. The final turning point came at a gala months later. Victoria approached Marianne, offering her hand in respect. The two shared a quiet acknowledgement, a connection built not on power or wealth, but on understanding and mutual recognition. Alexander observed from across the room, his dark eyes reflecting approval. The lesson had been learned, the balance restored. Wealth, power, and influence remained, but they were no longer the measure of worth. Victoria smiled genuinely, the first in months that felt free of arrogance or pretense. She had faced consequences, endured discomfort, and embraced transformation. She had learned that true fortune was measured not by money, but by empathy, respect, and the courage to change. Marianne's dignity had been preserved, Alexander's purpose fulfilled, and Victoria's growth undeniable. In that moment, the world no longer seemed like a stage to dominate, but a place to navigate with humility and intention. She understood that mistakes, no matter how grave, could become opportunities for growth. That respect, once lost, could be regained through sincerity and action. And that human connection, built on trust, patience, and understanding, was far more valuable than any fortune. As the evening ended, Victoria looked at the skyline. The lights glimmered not as symbols of status, but as reminders that even in a world of wealth and power, compassion and integrity were what truly illuminated life. She had fallen, but she had risen. She had erred, but she had grown. She had lost, but she had found what mattered most, herself. Victoria had finally understood, the greatest fortune is not money, but the chance to become better than you were yesterday. If you enjoyed this story, give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, share this video and tell us in the comments, what part of this journey moved you the most? There's another story waiting for you, and I'm sure it will change the way you see the world. Thank you for watching, see you soon.